after implementation. I'm really excited to be here, so I'll just start sharing my screen and jump straight into it. Give me a second, let me do that. Share screen. Okay. All right, so everyone can see my screen? Great. Okay, so I'll just give you a brief overview of what the presentation would look like. First, we would just look at the AfCFTA, some of the intended benefits of the AfCFTA. We'll look at AfCFTA implementation, both at the continental level and at the national level, and then stakeholder engagement under the AfCFTA, then modalities for trading under the AfCFTA, and a few things regarding the way forward, both from the continental perspective and the national perspective. Okay, so I imagine I might have to just run through this because this is something that is, we all know, having had this series for a while, that the AfCFTA is a single market for goods and services, right? And
surprisingly, we got so many questions before the session today. So
okay,
you'll be surprised that most people need more information.
Oh, sure,
so
no
please,
problem.
don't
Then
rush through it.
All right, sure, no problem. So
Yeah.
the AfCFTA was set up as a vehicle to amalgamate all of the African markets. So it encompasses 54 out of the 55 African states. And as of now, 47 have ratified the agreement, right? So it has a total population of 1.3 billion people, and then a combined gross domestic product of 3.4 trillion. For us, it presents one of the biggest free trade areas around for the size of the people, especially. Now, the agreement establishing the AfCFTA was signed in 2018, in Kigali, Rwanda. And it was for the first time an agreement had 22 countries sign on as soon as it was put out. And so we found that there was a lot of political will for this agreement. And yeah, so trading officially started on the 1st of January 2021. So that was when trade was intended to commence. So we had some ceremonial trades happen at the time. But the honest truth is, commercially meaningful trade started in October 2022 under the guided trade initiative that was piloted by the AfCFTA Secretariat in collaboration with 7 state parties, right? So some of the economic impacts of the AfCFTA. So according to a World Bank study, the AfCFTA is expected to see an increase in volume of intra-African trade by 81% by 2035. This represents a very significant growth from the current levels we see now. Currently, intra-African trade stands at below 16% compared to intracontinental trade done in the EU, in the North American Free Trade Area, in Asia, that's at like between 40 to 56%. And we see that a lot of work has to be done to allow us to become at par with some of these free trade areas. And according to the same World Bank study, the AfCFTA is expected to lift 50 million people, out of extreme poverty by 2035 and expand incomes by $571 billion. And those figures are for us transformational for the continent, because you know how the continent is wrought with a lot of poverty and low income. So we are excited for this to kick in. We also expect to see increased employment opportunities for farmers who are some of the most crucial people in our value chains on the continent, youth, women, and cross-border traders. We also expect to see export diversification and industrialization, and to attract foreign direct investment into Africa. Already, we are seeing a lot of companies from Europe, Asia, the Americas, looking to Africa as a brand new opportunity for them, where they'll set up hubs here and then access the African market from some of the states. But we are seeing that happening in Kenya, We're seeing that happening in Ghana and Nigeria. So that is exciting news for investment on the continent, right? And we also expect the AfCFTA to bring regional value chains or development of regional value chains and an attendant specialization in production to gain greater degree of efficiency. This simply means that in trading amongst ourselves more, we'll see ourselves moving away from the agrarian nature of our economies, right? Where because we have very similar outputs, people would find the need to add value and just create a niche for themselves in certain areas of value addition to be able to compete more on the continent. So that is also an exciting outcome we hope to see. And so I'll jump straight into the status of continental AfCFTA implementation. So in the past, just before trading began, the rules of origin threshold that had been agreed on was 88%. That was where we had looked at the tariff concessions from different countries and what measure we could reach for trading to officially begin. But this year, there have been some updates. So the conclusion of some tariff lines in textiles, right, and the automotive sector has seen us raise that threshold to about, hold on, let me move this. So about 92.3%, which is very significant, right? Because trading has started at around 82, 83%, rose to 88, and now we are seeing 92.3. That's very significant. And then some of the phase 2 protocols that were being discussed, specifically in intellectual property rights, investment and competition policy, have been concluded and have been adopted by the Assembly of Heads of States and Governments. So that happened earlier this year in February. And the Guided Trade Initiative I spoke about, that was launched on the 7th of October. So that happened last year, but this year we saw the initiative expand to see some other countries joining. Right now we are hovering at around 31 state parties who are getting ready to be a part of the second phase of the Guided Trade Initiative. And then on the protocols on digital trade and women and youth in trade, that is under consideration now and is expected to be concluded by the end of the year. So these are some updates for this year on continental AfCFTA implementation. And then
Adam, it looks like you're muted.
oh, sorry. So what the last thing you heard, just to be sure? Was it the slide?
Yes,
Okay,
you
great.
had just turned on to this.
Okay, great. So like I had mentioned earlier, the success of the Guided Trade Initiative saw a lot more countries put forward their interest in participating. So one of the things we saw, which we found very exciting, was that 31 state parties made up the second phase of the Guided Trade Initiative. And we are seeing an expansion in the products that are going to be traded in the second phase, up from the 90 we previously saw. So for us, that represents a lot of progress, significant progress in the implementation on the continent. And the Secretariat, who will be best placed to speak to this, but because we work hand in hand with them, I think I can touch on this, has adopted a corridor approach to our trade facilitation. That saw us start with an assessment of the Lagos-Abidjan corridor, just to pick up on some trade facilitation issues, non-tariff barrier issues, and just proffer solutions to resolving them. Because the honest truth is, a lot of trade will be done at the REX level before we move into the inter-REX level. So if at the REX level, our corridors do not work well, because in that visit, that assessment, we saw that there were about 93 stops from Abidjan to Lagos, right? And that for us does not bode well for free trade in the region. So the Secretariat is considering a corridor approach to tackle these challenges and has developed a roadmap for interventions for the challenges that were identified. So they've been categorized into infrastructure, systems, and coordination, right? And in trying to operationalize the AfCFTA, the Secretariat has also developed a CFTA tariff book. It's a digital product that provides tariffs of the 42 member states, which has increased now, that will enable us determine which goods have been liberalized and at what stage of liberalization they are. Later down in the presentation, I'll have a QR code where you can access that digital workbook, so that should be easy. And one of the things that I am particularly excited about is the operationalization of the PAPs, the Pan-African Payment and Settlement Systems, because hitherto we saw about $5 billion worth of revenue leaving the continent because we're using third-party settlement systems in Europe, the USA, other places, right? But PAPS is looking to resolve that to provide real-time settlement of trade and payments in local currencies. So we eliminate the third-party interference and save us some revenue for the continent. So that is, for me, presents a major highlight for the AfCFTA implementation. Let's see. Okay, so challenges. This is not something a lot of us like to hear, but there are challenges that come up in implementing frameworks of this magnitude. One of the biggest ones that comes up when we engage private sector stakeholders are logistics challenges, right? People trying to move goods across the continent, they find that their delivery times are so like expanded. People have to wait 90 days to take delivery of their goods. Whereas maybe if they were shipping to the US or Europe, you'd see lower delivery times. People have to go through more processes and procedures. And one of the things we realized was a lot of our shipping routes went through Europe and other places before they even go back to the continent. So you see that in trying to ship something to, let's say, Mauritania or Angola, the ship will probably go up to the global north before it comes down south. And that presents a lot of challenges for our private sector stakeholders. So for them, it doesn't make trading in Africa attractive. And that increases their cost as well. So it's something that we are looking at the national level. We've also escalated to the continental level. I know the Secretariat has signed some MOUs with some shipping companies trying to ease that. But yeah, something that needs to be addressed. Then another issue that comes up strongly is the varying stages of preparedness of the individual state parties, right? In the Guided Trade Initiative, Ghana was one of 7 countries to participate. We saw that in taking our goods to some African countries, even in the initiative, we had a lot of issues with regards to acceptance of the rules of origin, the structures they had in country. And whereas Ghana was very accepting because we had established our procedures and our protocols and we had everything in place, a lot of countries didn't. So you see where a situation where Ghanaian businesses want to say trade in South Africa, for example, and South Africa tells you we are not ready to take in here. And so for us, that is also an issue that needs to be resolved. I know that the Secretariat is working hard at that, trying to implement a national approach to implementation where each country has a national body that drives implementation. So I'm hoping that works well. Another thing that comes up is expected initial revenue losses by state parties. This is something that I don't want to mention the country, but a country very close to us complains about bitterly. And so they are not very compliant with the AfCFTA and the ETLS to some extent. So the Secretariat, in understanding this position, has put together an adjustment facility, a $1 billion adjustment facility that's expected to cushion the effects of these losses of trade. And then one thing, this is something that I also see myself, the fragmented markets with language and procedural barriers. So different markets, the different natures of our markets mean that there are different procedures that the different countries follow, right? Different languages, different certification protocols, even the different currencies, really. So in trying to amalgamate all that, there are hurdles, right? Because you can't get Ghanaian traders to go and trade in a place like Tanzania where the major language is Swahili, right? So there are all of these hurdles that we need to look at, we need to ease. And I am confident that the Secretariat is looking at all these things in trying to harmonize standards across the country for once, in trying to look at the role of a customs union, harmonized trade facilitation and all that. So I expect that these things would be remedied. And yeah, so these are some of the things I mentioned earlier, some mitigating measures to the challenges faced in AfCFTA implementation. So the AfCFTA adjustment facility to manage the adverse effects of revenue losses, that's a 1 billion facility. Then the Mansa repository platform, I didn't mention that. So that is a database for customer due diligence. In doing business with other countries, you need to know that you are entering into business with people who are known entities, people who have some level of integrity, so you don't run at losses. So the Mansa helps to do that, that due diligence, that quality assurance. Then the NTB reports, online reporting tool. So that's something that was developed to allow stakeholders to report non-tariff barriers they face in their trade. So that allows the Secretariat to get first-hand knowledge of where the non-tariff barriers are and then institute measures to remedy them. And then the harmonized standards and certification protocols. This is a very difficult thing to achieve, but I know that the African Standards Organization is working hard at ensuring that across the continent, we have some level of uniformity. So that would ease the trade on the continent, because if you are constantly having to face standards issues wherever you go, that is not a very efficient free trade area, right? So the Secretariat and the African Standards Organization is working hard at providing that uniformity. And in Ghana, so this is the national level. So this is where I'm most involved in. The government of Ghana, seeing the responsibility we bear in hosting the Secretariat, found it wise. And even in our provisions to Parliament, put forth the establishment of the National AfCFTA Coordination Office. So this office was established under the Ministry of Trade and Industry to coordinate Ghana's implementation of the AfCFTA. You know, there are so many moving parts in AfCFTA implementation. So in terms of enterprise support, certification, compliance, all of that, different agencies, different MDAs play so many diverse roles. So our job is to coordinate all those roles, to harmonize actions and activities and programs, make sure that eventually we are all working towards the single goal of making Ghana Africa's top trading partner. So that office has been established. That's where I currently work. And then the country developed its trading document. So we're one of the first to do that. And we designated GRACD as the competent authority. So for the issuance of our rules of origin certificate, GRACD is the sole competent authority to issue that. So they have their signatures on that and all that. And then as part of implementation efforts, in collaboration with a cross-section of stakeholders, we developed the National AfCFTA Policy Framework and Action Plan for boosting Ghana's trade with Africa. So it's a policy framework document that spells out a policy environment for the implementation of the AfCFTA in Ghana. So it's hinged on 7 clusters. So trade policy, trade facilitation, enhancing productive capacity, trade information, and trade and development finance, factor market integration. And I think that's 7, right? Is that 7? Yeah, and infrastructure, yes, infrastructure. So we look at all of these areas and provide some policy prescriptions for enhancing our implementation. We imagine that these are things that we can do to make sure that Ghana harnesses the benefits of the agreement. So I'll share a link later in the chat box to the document where you can see. And yeah, so as part of our outreach efforts, we also undertook some regional conferences on the implementation of AfCFTA. So we've had 2 circuits done. We did the first one before the start of trade, where we went to literally every single part of the country. So all of our capitals were there to sensitize people on the AfCFTA, the start of trading, its attendance benefits, and how they can take advantage of that. Earlier in the year, from late last year into earlier this year, until just a few months ago, we did a second circuit where we're all over the country as well, speaking to our stakeholders on the AfCFTA, how they can be a part. We're looking at regional comparative advantages, how each region could position themselves uniquely to plug into value chains under the AfCFTA. So that was exciting. And we've also rolled out some capacity building programs for stakeholder groups on the modalities for trading under AfCFTA. We've met with the financial institutions, the banks, the insurance companies, seeing how they can play their role effectively in AfCFTA implementation. We've met with regional representatives of our implementing partner institutions. And we expect to do more of that in trying to fully disseminate the AfCFTA agenda, right? One of the key things that we did in implementing the AfCFTA is to institute the facilitation program for companies exporting under AfCFTA. We call it the Market Expansion Project, right? So the project sought to identify companies, and that's in a nutshell, identify companies and facilitate their entry into Africa. It was a very systematic approach to driving Ghana's trade with Africa. So what we did is we looked at a catchment of companies, about over 6,000 companies, whittled it down to 1,008, and tried to segregate them into 3 categories, right? So the first one was companies who trade with Africa already. They have some experience in trading in Africa. We also looked at companies who traded outside of Africa, but don't trade in Africa. The idea was to take advantage of their export experience and reorient them to the African market. And the third category was companies who produce for the domestic market, but had the potential to export under AfCFTA. So having identified these companies, we got to work engaging them, profiling them, and doing some enterprise assessments, trying to see what kind of support they could use in expanding or entering into the African continent under the AfCFTA. And the project came full circle when we facilitated the entry of 63 Ghanaian businesses into East Africa, specifically Kenya, earlier this year. So that was, for me, one of the highlights of our work as the National Coordination Office, because we are trying to drive trade. People argue that it has some semblance of export promotion, but for us, our work is trade with Africa. So both imports in value chains and then exports. So for us, that was exciting to do. Then we've also instituted some fora for key AfCFTA implementing institutions and stakeholders. So I mentioned our work with the financial institutions, our work with other implementing institutions. So we try to have forums where we can discuss coordination rules, coordination issues, the possibility and now the establishment of AfCFTA focal desks at these institutions to help us better coordinate the work that we do under the AfCFTA. So far, that's what we've been doing in Ghana. Now, jumping into awareness of the AfCFTA, like I mentioned earlier, we've undertaken 2 circuits of nationwide awareness programs where we went to every single regional capital. The very first circuit was in 2020 to 2021, I think 2020, sorry, where we had to sensitize stakeholders on the AfCFTA before the start of trade. And more recently, we did from December 2022 into somewhere August, September 2023, just a few months ago, where we went to every single region, tried to ascertain their regional comparative advantages and how they can be uniquely set up to take full advantage of the AfCFTA. So we've been around the country trying to do that. We've also developed some publications. We have an AfCFTA FAQs document. I think I'll drop the link to that as well in the chat. And then some explainer videos on our YouTube channels where we try to simplify the AfCFTA message so people can get a good measure of what the AfCFTA is and what we are trying to achieve under the AfCFTA. So here I put in that in recognizing the need to do more, the NCO is set to develop a comprehensive communication strategy. We recognize, like I said, that in trying to rally around the entire country behind the AfCFTA, there's so much more that we could be doing or we should be doing. And we imagine that a very comprehensive communication strategy would help us properly identify all of our stakeholders, even some that we might have missed in the past, and outreach to them, try and get them on board, do more work with them, so that we find that our approach is very inclusive, right? We also plan to intensify stakeholder engagement efforts with our public and private sector stakeholders and to decentralize enterprise support using regional level after desks. That is one of our key activities for next year. We've engaged the regional coordinating councils, and we've come to realize they are a very instrumental body at the regional level for enterprise support. And so we are currently building a framework for coordination with them where we see them serve as our regional AfCFTA desk. So they become our front line to enterprises in the region. So that for people who can't come all the way to Accra, have competent people they can go to in the region who can take them through modalities for trading and how to take advantage of the AfCFTA. So in our private sector engagements, we've done extensive consultations with a cross-section of private sector practitioners in the development of the National After Policy Framework I mentioned. So in 2020, a lot of work was done with a diverse group of private sector practitioners where we had technical working groups under each cluster I mentioned earlier. And the technical working groups were drawn from the private sector, the public sector, some CSOs, academia, just to get a very well-rounded view of the clusters we're trying to approach implementation from. And we also established the facilitation program for companies exporting under AfCFTA I mentioned earlier. So that's more of a direct support program to companies, trying to get them into the market under the AfCFTA. And we've also instituted capacity building programs on rules of origin and trading modalities. So we've had some program, I think 3 or 4 sessions where we've pulled together some companies and taken them through rules of origin, how they can be compliant, the modalities for trade, and how they can be best placed to take advantage of the AfCFTA. So I'll zoom in into trading under AfCFTA because I imagine this is something that would be germane for a lot of private sector people here. To trade under the AfCFTA, there are 2 major things you need to consider, right? A rules of origin certificate and knowledge of the tariff concessions of the country you are either exporting to or importing from. Under the rules of origin, goods eligible must originate from state parties, right? This doesn't preclude goods that are significantly transformed. So there's a whole criteria conferring origin. So I'll just jump into that. So products originating from the state party must fit any or a number of these criteria. Be wholly obtained in that state. So for wholly obtained goods, we are looking at maybe farm products, maybe products that were taken from the sea in that area, things that were got directly from that state party. So when you look at something that's like from Ghana, you look at shea butter or processed cashew. If the inputs are not within a certain threshold, these are wholly obtained things that qualify. Then goods have undergone substantial transformation in that state party. So some people might get some inputs from somewhere, but then the tariff headings change for the goods and the goods are significantly transformed. So we say that that criteria confers origin. And goods that have undergone significant value addition. So we look at the value of the goods and see that if it has a value addition threshold of 30-60%, it qualifies as originating from the state party. So in trying to certify this, we have an AfCFTA certificate of origin that is issued as proof of origin. And so that goes when you are exporting your goods, it accompanies the goods as part of your paperwork. And then the ideal is that the goods will be treated preferentially in the African country is going to once they are ratified under the AfCFTA. So in trying to determine the tariff concessions, the Secretariat has developed the CFTA tariff book. I mentioned that earlier. It's a digital product that provides tariffs of the 42 member states, aiding in operationalizing trade facilitation, sorry. So there's a QR code here. So if you just put your camera to it, you can scan it and it takes you directly to the tariff book. There you can search where you're exporting from, where you intend to export to, the product you are looking to export, and it gives you an overview of the schedule of the tariff concessions for that product and where you are at. So this is a very important tool for people looking to export under the AfCFTA. So now the way forward. At a continental level, the AfTA Secretariat is looking to institute a GTIS. So the GTIS is the Guided Trade Initiative on Service. So you know the initial Guided Trade Initiative, sorry, the initial Guided Trade Initiative is on goods. So the GTIS would complement that and try and push through the services agenda. And we are looking at 5 major service areas for now, out of the 12. And so that will be developed and communicated in the coming months. And seeing as the protocols, the phase 2 protocols, the phase 2 protocols had been adopted earlier this year, that's intellectual property rights, investments, and competition policy. We are looking to see implementation on that front, mainly in the areas of capacity building across the continent and trying to get different institutional bodies strengthened in these areas and playing ball. So the AfTA Secretariat also plans to establish the AfCFTA SME support program. So in partnership with certain institutions, they're looking to mobilize up to $2 billion to provide trade finance solutions and capacity building to SMEs and financial institutions that lend to these SMEs. So for a lot of us in the private sector, that seems to be the biggest issue, the cost of finance, access to finance in trading. And for someone in Ghana, where your cost of finance is in the double digits, compared to someone in other countries where it's in the lower double 11, 12% on the continent, that disparity makes us slightly uncompetitive. So initiatives like this would go a long way to help us take advantage of the AfCFTA. At the national level, I mentioned earlier, the NCO is looking to establish focal desks at partner institutions at the regional level. So mainly with our regional coordinating councils, to have them be our front lines at the regional level so that businesses at the regional and district levels have a place to go in terms of trying to access enterprise support. And we are also looking to develop the Ghana After Trade Information Repository. One of the biggest things we've come to find is that a lot of Ghanaian businesses don't have enough trade information on where to take their goods, the nature of the markets they are trying to take goods in, even route to market strategies they could employ to enter these markets. So we have, as part of our planning for next year, we decided to undertake this initiative, develop the repository, have people access timely information on the continent. And we're also looking to continue to roll out market entry strategies for the private sector players we work with. So a lot of people are trying to access the market, so we plan to continue facilitating their entry. In the past, we did that for 63 businesses into Kenya. Next year in January, we are looking to do some 70 businesses into Tanzania, just to consolidate our position as Ghana in the East African market. Hopefully, we'll also do some other regions on the continent. We are also looking to review our national policy framework. We imagine there are a lot of things that have happened since the start of trade, so we want to update it. And then at the highest level, there will be some national trade policy reviews, but that is at the very high level of national trade policies. So thank you. Thank you. I hope this was very insightful for you. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question I actually got was interesting, but I believe that you've already addressed that in your presentation. Thank you very much, Adam. And ladies and gentlemen, we've heard from the National AfCFTA Coordination Council. He has shared on initiatives that have taken place this year and where we are heading towards in 2024. Please, we are going to ask for only 4 questions. We'll continue after the second presenter has spoken, but Adam will have to rush into another meeting. So please, if you have your questions, some people have already sent some questions to the WhatsApp, but if you have some questions, you can put up your hand and then ask your questions whilst he's here with us. If there's no hand up, I'll quickly ask the ones that were sent to the chat, the WhatsApp number. The first question we received was, what is the rules of origin? And what do you mean by the 92% threshold tariff in text on text? I think on text is what the person tried to say. Adam, if you could hear me.
Hi, I can hear you now. So the rules of origin are mainly all the regulations determining how goods originating from Africa should be treated. So the rules of origin are for a lot of free trade areas, they just go to determine that this good originated from here and as such has to be treated preferentially under that free trade area, right? And so, like I said earlier, the AfCFTA has the AfCFTA certificate of origin that goes to certify that the goods are from the AfCFTA region. So that's the 54 out of 55 African countries. Now, in the 92% I mentioned, those are tariff lines. So the volume of tariff lines that have been agreed. In the AfCFTA area, there's an attendance agreement between the countries to trade, and each country provides their tariff concessions where they'll treat those tariff concessions preferentially. So in the past, there were some other lines that were being considered. So that's textiles, automobile. And so that's why we're at 88% at a point. But now 92.3% of these tariff lines, so these tariff lines are basically products, right, that are being agreed upon to be treated preferentially.
Okay, so we have a question in the chat box. The question is there any information from Eritrea and Djibouti? Their ratification status, is it still on at no commitment?
So for Eritrea, we've not got updates from Eritrea on even signing the agreement, right? Because Eritrea was the one country that hadn't signed. I do know that now Djibouti has signed, but as to ratification, I would have to confer with the secretary. I'm just finding out that Djibouti has actually ratified. So they are considered having ratified the agreement. So if you have some goods you want to take to Djibouti, feel free and take those goods there.
In fact, someone asked, I don't know where I wrote that question because there are a lot of chats, but someone asked somewhere, okay, let me just read from the top. The second question is, what is the Women in Tech Trade initiative and how do I, as a woman, qualify?
So the Women in Tech Trade initiative, it's not being rolled out by the Ghana National AfCFTA Coordination Office, first off. So I might not be the best resource to speak to it. But I imagine if you're a woman in tech, there should be no limits to you participating in such an initiative. So maybe we'd have to try and find out the qualification requirements that whoever instituted that initiative puts up, and then you go for it and apply. I think it's a brilliant initiative you should take advantage of. Thank you.
Okay. So, Regina, I think that we would have to find more information on this and share with you later. Then we have after fiscal desk. Can an institution create a focal desk within their organization with the support of the NACO office?
Yeah, so that is what we are championing at the moment. So far, we have about 22 focal desks in various institutions, from public to private sector. Even some banks have after desks. So the idea is that that desk will be solely responsible for handling after issues in collaboration with the NCO. We are hoping to expand that by 30 next year. So yeah, so an institution who doesn't have an AfCFTA desk and would want one can always reach out to us and would extend that program support to them. All right, thank you.
Thank you. So the third one is who issues certificates of origin?
So like I mentioned earlier, the designated authority for the issuance of certificates of origin is GRA Customs. So when you sign up on the ICOMS to requesting for one, a joint inspection team visits your place of business where you manufacture just to ascertain your rules of origin compliance. And then GRA Customs is solely responsible for the issuance of an AfCFTA certificate upon verification that you are indeed compliant with the AfCFTA rules of origin.
Okay, this is an interesting one. So the person says, last year we were informed that we needed registration with the AfTA office to participate in trade. Is the registration still required? I did not hear that in your presentation.
So the only registration required is registration on the ICOMS, but that is in a bid to get the AfCFTA certificate of origin. We don't require businesses to directly register with us to trade, because we keep saying that the only difference to trading is the AfCFTA certificate of origin, and like I said, knowledge of the tariff concessions of the goods and the country where you're exporting to. So you try and register on the ICOMS platform to get a certificate of origin. Now we realize that the ICOMS platform allows agents and other specialized individuals to access the platform. So for some ordinary businesses, they might not have access to the platform, right? So what we try to do in trying to facilitate the process for them is to get a manual form where we have them fill out, and then we, in our collaborations with GRACD, the ICOMS platform, we try to get it entered into the system and get them on the list to be inspected and then issue the certificate of origin. So that is not them registering with us, that is us facilitating their process of getting an AfCFTA certificate of origin.
Very well.
Thank you.
Great. So for once of time, I'm just going to ask the last question, and then please we plead with those who have sent their question or we couldn't read. We'll try and get them privately to you after the session today. So the last one says that who are or what are the 31 countries ready to trade next year and when?
So I'll just have to pull up a list real quick. Let me just do that real quick. Give me a second. Is my mic still on?
Yes.
Okay. So in East Africa, we have Kenya, the URT, that's Tanzania, Uganda, and Rwanda. In Central Africa, we have Cameroon, Burundi, the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Equatorial Guinea, Congo, Brazzaville, and Gabon. In North Africa, we have Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco. In Southern Africa, we have Angola, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. In West Africa, we have Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, Senegal, and Togo. And for our island states, we have Cape Verde, Comoros, Madagascar, Mauritius, and the Seychelles. So these are the 31 countries in the different regions that are planning to ascend to the GTI. The second phase was supposed to be rolled out earlier this year, but that has been postponed to next year. So we expect to see that sometime next year, I imagine. I don't have the dates, but it will be rolled out. The second phase will be rolled out.
Great. Mr. Daniel Kumsin's question, last one. We know that border crossing in Africa is a major problem. How are you practically dealing with border bottlenecks?
So like I mentioned earlier, for the crossing of goods, the Secretariat has taken a corridor approach, trying to resolve these bottlenecks at the corridor stops. But we are also looking at the free movement of natural persons. That's something we are looking at under factor market integration. And for now, I can't speak to the Secretariat's initiatives, but I know that at the national level, we are engaging bilaterally with some of our state parties, our partner state parties, to see whether we can have mutual agreements on movement of persons. And we've seen that happen with South Africa. We know Kenya instituted it. Tanzania has opened up. We are expecting to see more of that in the coming years to facilitate trade amongst us. Thank you.
Very soon we'll have a visa-free continent.
Hopefully, that's the goal. That's the goal.
Very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Edem. It's been lovely having you today to join us to share on initiatives which are being undertaken by the NACO, or the National AfCFTA Coordination Office, on the accelerating of AfCFTA implementation in Ghana. We've also heard about what is happening elsewhere through your organization. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing this insights with us. We have some questions. We will text them to you and get the responses to the individuals after the discussion today. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, for want of time, we'll quickly move to our second session. So we've heard about Ghana, but let's have a comparison discussion. What is happening in other countries in Africa? What initiatives are being undertaken by nationals or countries in accelerating the implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area? Is Ghana matching up? Are we prepared? And is Africa as a continent or as a whole ready to enjoy all these benefits that this one single market, the largest in the world, is here to present us? So as I said earlier, we have Dr. Richmond Kwame Frimpong. He's an award-winning financial advisory, trade and investment promotions practitioner, and he's here to talk on the topic accelerating AfCFTA implementation in other African countries. Dr. Richmond, thank you for joining us, and I hand over to you.
Thank you, Tekla. Do I have full screen?
Yes, you do.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be straight and brief, but my perspective is across the continent. So I'm going to be looking at tracking the progress so far. Now, anytime we talk about AfCFTA, the understanding we need to have is that it sits in a context for the continent called Agenda 2063. And this is almost what is producing, or one of the things AfCFTA is a product of. And so for us to really talk about our outlook in terms of how we are doing in implementing AfCFTA, it's important to understand the AU Agenda 2063 performance in itself and the areas where the focuses are pointing to, so that we can now zoom in onto AfCFTA and be able to tell why we are where we are. If you look at the screen, anything beyond 90 is green, very green, deep green, and it reduces from 80 to 89 and comes all the way to red, which is between 0 and 19. At the moment, as far as our performance on the continent is concerned,
Hey.
as far as our performance is concerned, you'll see that there is only one near red score, and that is on transformed economies and job creation on the left. Transformed economies and job creation. Now, the next one that is closer to that is number 1, which is a high standard of living, quality of life, and well-being for all. You can also look at number 12, capable institutions and transformed leadership in place at all levels. You can equally look at number 16, African cultural renaissance. You can look at 18, engage and empowered youth and children. The greatest in terms of performance is a united Africa as a federal or as a confederate. And then that we are scoring about 98. The next is 81, which is full gender equality in all spheres of life. So this scorecard points to the fact that indicators or goals that border on economic integration are still lagging behind. And you can find that in item 4, which is the transformed economies and job creation. You can find that in item 6, which is the blue ocean economy for accelerated economic growth. You can find that in item even 10, world-class infrastructure, which crisscrosses the entire continent, among others. So on that basis, it gives us an understanding of where we are. Now, the next thing that we pay attention to that gives us a perspective of progress, again, from Agenda 2063, that we need to pay attention to is what we call the aspiration level. So out of this Agenda 2063, the AU, together with the African leadership team, have curated what we call the aspiration levels, and they border on a prosperous Africa that looks at inclusive growth. Inclusive growth meaning it is not just an elite group of people or a few people in a political class or some very tiny percentage of people in business and enterprise, but there is an even distribution of wealth all the way across the continent, all the way across age brackets, and all the way across both the formal and the informal sector. And that is our aspiration number 1, and we are scoring 37. It means that prosperity is still skewed on the continent, both regionally and then also at the national level, and then at the level of our income distribution. Our next aspiration is a continent that has a very good integration politically, and that is very critical, meaning at the level of political unity that is driven by a certain vision of being African. We all appreciate ourselves as African, and we all see ourselves as Africans, and we are united on some ideals, the ideals of Pan-Africanism and co, the likes of the thinking that are in the likes of the Nelson Mandelas, the Madibes, and the Nkrumahs. And that aspiration too, we are scoring very high, very proud of ourselves. Then you look at aspiration 3, which is good governance, democracy, that really puts rule of law at the forefront of what we do and the respect for human rights. And you see that we are scoring below 50 once again. Then aspiration 4 is about peace and security. Aspiration 5 is about cultural identity, and then our values and our heritage. Aspiration 6 is about developing our human capital. And then aspiration 7 is becoming a very influential partner on the global stage. Now, all the critical ones that point us to after, we are scoring very low on those. So again, even at the level of continental aspiration, this score should give us a perspective, an expectation of how well we are doing with after, and I'll come to that. Then when I step down into the regional level on the same aspiration level, this gives you an idea as to how regionally we are doing. And you can tell that Eastern Africa is leading the pack. That is where you find Kenya. That is where you find Ethiopia and some other countries on that stretch, even Rwanda and co. They are ahead. The next would be Southern Africa. So then, in terms of all the aspirations, in terms of all the pointers that are leading us into an economic integration that will bring some leadership and that will bring some economic freedom, these two blocks, the Eastern and the Southern guys, are leading. And so the expectation is that even talking about continental free trade, they may be advanced. And then just behind Central Africa is Western, where Ghana sits. And then the Northern guys are also just behind like that, the last, so to speak. And it's because of their posture in terms of the association with the continent. Then I pick out of many things that we are supposed to be doing out of the Agenda 2063 that would influence our progression on AfTA and speak to them. And one of them is African passport and free movement. Now, this project was basically to make it possible and easy for, if really we mean to trade together, then it should reflect on how we move from one country to another and the ease with which that movement happens. And it was hinged on a passport that it recognized everywhere African. And I'm not too excited to say that even though 33 African countries have signed up to that protocol, only 4 have ratified the same. So again, yes, we are talking about AfTA, yes, we are talking about implementation, but there are critical anchors that will point you to the expectation of how far we have gone with AfTA. And until those anchors are moved up notches, we are not going to make much with our continental free trade argument. And so this is one thing you need to watch. The next thing, which is very critical, is our financial institutions, because aside the economic integration, what makes meaning of the continental free trade agreement is how we are able to monetize and de-risk our currencies out of the influence of the internationally accepted or tradable currencies. And to be able to do that, we will need a certain focus on regional integration at the level of our financial institutions. And again, the purpose was to build a common monetary policy and a single currency, so that this whole complexity about more than 50, 40 something currencies that would have to transact in order for something to happen differently, so complex, could all be cured. And I mean, if you're in West Africa and you've heard of ECHO and when it was started and where we are and the shifting of poles, it should tell you that this is going to be a very difficult feat to have. And so it becomes another challenge that makes it almost impossible for a convergence at the macro level of our economies. And so that is another picture. Having given you this bird's eye view of our own vision as a continent, out of which we have built the goal of the continental free trade, I now give you a picture of the continental free trade. And if you heard, I think I deliberately asked a question about the position of Djibouti and Eritrea. Look at the colors, the colors carefully, and you see what represents signed, ratified, and submitted. And you see what represents just signed and submitted. And you see what represents signed but not ratified or even submitted. And then you see what represents newly signed, just signed. And then you see what represents no commitment. Literally, if you look at the top right-hand corner, the eastern side, the Horn side, it is Djibouti alone, Eritrea alone at the moment that has shown no commitment at all. Djibouti has signed and ratified. And so that is some good news, and deposited as well. And so that is why you're seeing that green dot there. But at least based on what you see, everything green has deposited or submitted. But look at it carefully. We have well in excess of 18 African countries that have just signed and have not ratified. And so when you go back to the point about our score in terms of a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, that's why we are scoring 37. That is why we cannot integrate our economies, because we do not agree on so many things that would help us move fast on this continental free trade. And at any time T, you see that it has implication on how fast we move in terms of implementation. So out of the about 44 states parties that need to go through. You'll see about 36 that have ratified and signed, and it gives you an idea. Now, what really is progress? There has been some success, and at the level of the continent, at least trading has begun, and that is a good sign. And the example of trade, I mean, speaking to Ghanaians, is the example between Rwanda and Ghana, where coffee is traded. And so the fact that we can trade on the platform of AfCFTA, and the example of Ghana, Rwanda for coffee, and Kenya, Ghana for tea is at least a good progress. But I say it's not enough, because there are about 4,500 products that are listed under the tariff headings, and we need to hit much more than what we are doing. At the moment, we are doing just about 100 products. So that tells you how far we have to go. And then also, you see that we are not able to do much also because we have not expanded our ability to trade using the rule of origin into other places like Asia, Europe, Latin America, where there is heavy consumption, among other things. And that is another challenge. Another challenge is connectivity, still a problem. And here I say, when Kenya tea is exported from Kenya to, say, Singapore first, then to West Africa, it should tell you that because we don't have connectivity in terms of transition, it is easier to move from Kenya to Asia than to move from Kenya to West Africa, east to west. So it's so difficult. And that makes it expensive doing business that way. And that again takes us back to our own aspiration level in terms of how we are doing on our own aspiration level as a continent to be able to score something that makes this continental free trade thing possible. So it's not enough, even though trading has begun. Another important progress is the Pan-African payment system. Remember, I spoke about the critical anchor of an African financial services platform and how we are struggling to do that with just 3 or so countries that have ratified it. It reflects here. So we have built a PAP system. Yes, it is a good progress. And I must say that it helps because it de-risks and it demystifies the use of dollar in our transactions. But for how much? For how much? For what volume? For what size? And that is what determines the possibility of it is determined by our convergence, a meeting point where we all have some stability in our macroeconomy and we are all able to converge at a point where we can synchronize our financial system and give relevant value to the transactions we do in terms of our trading. And that is at that time only that we can make some very good progress with what we have done in terms of our progression in implementation. So from a bird's eye view, my conclusion is that the initiative is great, born out of the Agenda 2063, great, but the progress we have made so far, very little. And I've explained why that progress is so. And I think we have a long way to go as a continent. Thank you.
Wow, that was interesting. So like concurrently we got 5 people. Initially we got 3 and then 2 people have sent and we are all asking the same question. Okay, so difference, but in all, I think what they are saying is, say, do you think we can get there? That was the last person. So the first person is looking at your presentation. I don't think we will get there. Then the second person was, it looks like Africa has a long way to go. So I think they're all asking or all around the same area. I think people want to know from what we have heard from you. When is Africa Continental Free Trade Area or the Agenda 2063 going to be a reality? Because the challenges you've raised are real, and we actually can't see. I'd not to be specific with that question. What is being done to address these challenges?
Right. So pragmatically, if you even look at our agenda, today, it should tell you the pragmatism in terms of how possible it is and the speed with which you are going to get there. Because when we have built this on the platform of Agenda 2063, it means the whole continent is looking at a 40-year implementation plan. And just the mere thought that it will take us 40 years to become the Africa we want should tell you that we are just taking a snail pace. That is why that should guide everybody, because 2063 is a 40-year from today, it's a 40-year journey. And if an African leader tells you that I'm going to do something in 40 years, it should tell you the pace. That is why 18 or so would just agree and not take any step. That is why we are scoring below 50 on economic convergence. So there's no sense of urgency. Having said that, though, economic integration like this take a lot of time, particularly for a continent like Africa, where there's no hard and soft infrastructure that will leapfrog us to make it possible. Nothing exists. Everything will have to be built from ground zero. And it is not easy implementing it on a block, even in a country. Even in a country, how much more multitude of a number of all the countries that are not doing so well. That is why North Africa is a bit cut off, and you see East Africa and Southern Africa taking the lead. So we just have to be realistic that this is not going to change in a 4-year term. No, it is taking us a 40-year run. So we just have to be patient with the continent.
Wow, that was really interesting. It actually gives a lot more insights when people keep asking. So we've started trade. Which people are trading? Where are we trading to? At least now we have perspective to understand that the problem is not Ghana moving goods to Nigeria. It's huge, it's bigger. We have corridor issues, we have regulatory issues, we have marketing issues, and we have geographical issues, which the presenter has spoken a lot about. Please, for our participants online, we are really fast or long past our time, but if you have a question, we'll take just one or two. If not, then we can bring our session today to a close. So we are just giving 5 minutes if anyone online. The 5 questions I got on WhatsApp were almost the same, which Miss Doctor has addressed already. From Mr. Daniel Kumsen, 40-year plan to full implementation of free trade. Africa is no problem at all. It has taken over 50 in Africa, okay. It has taken over 50 years to see the need for unity in Africa since Nkrumah time. Well, I like that. That's a positive statement. It means we've come a long way, or so many years to get where we are. And today we are not only talking about it, we are not only dreaming about it, that we have started the implementation. It may be 40 years, but if we are lucky, things could be accelerated to a faster implementation. We can actually see the one Africa market we've been looking for. I think as the presenter said, it's in stages. You are looking from economic to geographical to a state where we can say we have a one Africa continent or one Africa country and not one that is segregated as we have today. So thank you, Mr. Emmanuel. Is it possible to get the recording? Absolutely, we share with you. Please send a text to the WhatsApp number 055 256 9520. If you want the recording, we'll get your record and then we'll share the recording to you. I mention it again, 055 256 9520. I've just shared it in the chat box as well. So those who have not done that, who need a recording, you can send an email to the email number we gave earlier as well. Thank you all very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have gone past our time. Thank you for staying with us throughout the session. We have learned about AfCFTA. The Secretariat and then the National AfCFTA Coordination Office have also informed us about initiatives and how their office is open to facilitate and access. Somebody asked a question which we couldn't ask. The person asked whether there could be facilitation among traders in these African countries. But I think the speaker addressed that in his presentation. So yes, when you go to the AfCFTA coordination office or any of the focal points desk, you can have access to facilitation where you meet or you'll be introduced to suppliers and buyers in the other African countries, especially the 31 who we are expecting to commence trade next year. It is a step by step, little by little, but we can't give up. We are sure that we will get there. And by the time our children are 50 years, Africa will have a single market, which should be the largest in the world, and economic development and growth for individuals in Africa will be recording high rates than we have today. Everything is possible, and we are happy to have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area being implemented in our time or in our generation. Thank you all once again, and we hope to be back with you in December. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. And Dr. Afrimpong, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you. You've given us a clear insight. Now we know we don't have to chastise the government or the after secretaries or any of the stakeholders. We need to understand the pace we are in. That was really insightful. Thank you so much. Thank you all, everyone.